He was 16 years old. He was dying of leprosy. His hands were bandaged. His body was already failing, and he could barely grip the reins of his horse. And he was about to ride into battle against one of the most dangerous commanders in the Near East. The later legends made it sound impossible. But underneath the legend is a real battle, real strategy, and one of the most shocking reversals of the Crusades. This is Montgisard, November 1177. The kingdom of Jerusalem was in crisis. Saladin, Sultan of Egypt and Syria, already the most powerful Muslim ruler in the region, had just launched a major invasion. Medieval sources describe his army as enormous. Some claim around 20,000 men or more, though exact numbers are debated. But what is clear is this: Baldwin was badly outnumbered. Saladin swept through the undefended southern part of the kingdom, raiding, burning, and spreading terror through towns and villages that had no way to resist him. The Crusader army could not stop him because most of the kingdom's knights had gone north with a visiting Crusader lord. Saladin had every reason to believe Jerusalem was exposed. He had picked this exact moment deliberately. The king of Jerusalem was Baldwin IV. Crowned at just 13, he had been diagnosed with leprosy as a child, around the age of 9, when his tutor first noticed the boy could not feel pain in his hands. By 16, the disease was visible. His body was deteriorating. He was losing sensation in his limbs, and he fought with bandaged hands that could barely hold a weapon. Most kings in his position would have stayed behind walls. They would have waited. They would have let someone else lead. Baldwin rode out to meet Saladin himself. He gathered everything he had, around 375 to 500 knights, including roughly 80 elite Knights Templar, under their Grand Master Odo of Saint Amand, plus several thousand infantry and archers. Against Saladin's vast army, it was not even close to a fair fight. But Saladin had made a catastrophic mistake. In his confidence, in his certainty that the Crusaders were too weak to challenge him, he had allowed his massive army to spread out across the countryside. His troops were scattered, burdened with plunder, and not formed for a major battle. They had left their baggage train, their food, water, treasure, and supplies miles behind. By the time Baldwin's force caught up with them near the town of Montgisard on November 25th, 1177, Saladin's troops were completely unprepared for what was coming. Before the charge, something happened that chroniclers of the time recorded with deep reverence. Baldwin was helped down from his horse. He dropped to his knees in front of the relic of the true cross, a piece of wood believed by every man in that army to be from the actual cross of Jesus Christ. He prayed. A teenage king with a crumbling body, kneeling in the dust before a battle he had no logical reason to believe he could win. To the men around him, this was not just a battle. It felt like Judgment Day. Then he rose, and he commanded the charge. What followed was one of the most lopsided reversals in medieval military history. The Crusader heavy cavalry, led by the Templars, some of the most fearsome soldiers alive, smashed into the disorganized Muslim lines like a thunderbolt. Saladin's men, spread out and caught completely off guard, broke almost immediately. The panic spread like fire through dry grass. The pursuit reportedly continued for miles, some accounts say as far as 12, as Saladin's army broke apart across the open ground. Saladin's elite Mamluk bodyguard, 1,000 of his finest warriors, recognizable in their yellow tunics, threw themselves into the path of the charge to protect their commander. They were largely destroyed, and Saladin himself barely escaped with his life. He abandoned his horse and fled on a racing camel, the fastest animal available, as everything around him collapsed. One of his own great-nephews was killed in the fighting. His baggage train, carrying his army's treasure, weapons, and supplies, was captured by the Crusaders. The humiliation of Montgisard would follow Saladin for years. Some accounts claimed only a fraction of his original force, even as little as a tenth, made it back to Egypt with him. The victory was so stunning, so completely against every military calculation, that it was declared a miracle across the Christian world. People said God had acted through a dying boy king, and Baldwin chose to honor it accordingly. He founded a monastery on the site of the battle, dedicated to St. Catherine of Alexandria, because it had been her feast day. But for Baldwin, Montgisard was not the end of the story. It was barely the beginning. He kept fighting. He kept leading. As leprosy destroyed his body year by year, taking his sight, damaging his hands and face, and eventually leaving him unable to ride, he continued to command his kingdom. At times he had to be carried into the field on a litter. Blind, weakened, and in constant pain, he refused to let Jerusalem fall while he still had breath. He died at around 24 years old. He had been king for a decade, and under his leadership, fighting through a disease that would have broken almost anyone else, Jerusalem held. Saladin never stopped trying. He raided again. He pushed at the borders again and again. And finally, in 1187, 2 years after Baldwin's death, he got the moment he had been waiting for. At the Battle of Hattin, with a different king on the throne, he destroyed the Crusaders completely and took Jerusalem. The kingdom that Baldwin IV had held together with bandaged hands, sheer willpower, and faith finally fell apart without him. Montgisard was not the beginning of a Crusader triumph. It was one of the last great flashes of something extraordinary. A moment when a dying teenage king rode out against a force that should have destroyed him, dropped to his knees before a battle he could not win, and somehow won it anyway. History is full of great commanders, full of great armies, full of men who won because they were stronger, smarter, or better equipped. But Montgisard belongs to a different category entirely. It belongs to the battles that should never have happened, that should never have been won, that exist in the historical record as a reminder that sometimes the numbers, the logic, and the odds are simply wrong, and that the most unbreakable thing on a medieval battlefield was not steel. It was the will of a 16-year-old boy who refused to quit.